It was then that Charlotte's eyes fell on the one figure in the room apart from herself. She had to cover her mouth to stop from screaming as she looked up from her horizontal position at what she could only describe as a synthetic human, a machine made to look like a person. It was beyond the uncanny valley. "Do not struggle," the machine said in a strange cadence. "You will be dressed appropriately." The robot was clearly designed to look female. Its skin was pale and lifeless, but it covered a slender and busty body. The face looked down at Charlotte without expression, its eyes looking dull and tired and its mouth in a seemingly permanent half-smile. It was very creepy. What are you?" Charlotte asked in horrified fascination. "I am the nanny," was the stilted response from the figure in front of Charlotte. I'm a journalist," Charlotte exclaimed. "I'm reporting on this place and I demand to be taken to the owner of this facility. And also to be dressed appropriately. Your former life doesn't matter now. I will dress you appropriately," the nanny replied. Charlotte watched the robot reach under the table and pull up a piece of clothing that looked very familiar and very alien at the same time. It was a long shirt, pink in color, with snaps at the bottom. It was yet another item that reminded Charlotte of her time working in a nursery. "I'm not putting a Odyssey on," Charlotte said simply. She tried sitting up for the first time but found that she was still too weak. "You will be a good girl and wear what you are told," the nanny replied simply. Charlotte wanted to resist and she tried really hard to fight the nanny, which started manipulating her body to put her in the thin Odyssey. Charlotte was getting increasingly frustrated and angry. Tears fell down her cheek as she blushed at this fresh humiliation. She impotently tried to get her muscles to move but found them to be too weak. Charlotte found herself being moved around like a doll as the nanny slipped each of her limbs through the holes and pulled the stretchy material over her head. Charlotte could do little more than scowl at the uncaring machine as it went about its task in a cold and calculating manner. Once the Odyssey was on her, Charlotte could feel the snaps between her legs being fastened together. The soft padding of the diaper was pushed up into the journalist's crotch as the stretchy Odyssey hugged Charlotte's body. The nanny picked Charlotte up with an ease that surprised the young woman and she was carried over to the large crib. The nanny held Charlotte against her chest in the same way a mother would hold a baby. Charlotte was gently lowered into the baby bed as she looked around for a way out. Apart from the conveyor belt there was one other door, but it looked like it was very securely sealed. "I'm not supposed to be here," Charlotte yelled at the robot as it stood up and left Charlotte alone in the bed. The nanny didn't respond. Charlotte watched it press a button that looked like a light switch and a television screen popped out of the wall it was embedded in. Charlotte saw 4 tubes, one attached to each corner of the screen. They came out of the wall behind the screen and moved over to the crib. Charlotte momentarily forgot her own fear as she watched this incredible machinery in action. "Hey! Come back!" Charlotte shouted. She had looked away to see Nanny opening the secure door and leaving the room. Charlotte was alone. The room was silent for a few seconds. Charlotte wondered briefly if this could be a practical joke, but it was far too elaborate for that. The technology on display was stunning. Whatever this was, it was a very advanced operation. Just as Charlotte was about to give up hope on anything happening, the screen suddenly turned on to reveal the same woman from the screen in the machine smiling at her. Charlotte felt an innate hatred of this complete stranger who seemed to mock her suffering with that smile on that face covered in makeup. "Hello again," the woman said with enthusiasm. "This room will be your home for a few days to allow you to adjust to your new role. You will receive mental and physical training to prepare you for the next step in your journey. Stork Industries thanks you for volunteering for such a noble cause." "What cause?" Charlotte shouted at the screen uselessly. "I didn't volunteer for anything. No one here volunteered for this. As you know, Stork Industries supplies couples who wish to have a baby with their own adult baby, and you are the latest in a long line of people who have been volunteered into the program. Now get your rest, little one. Tomorrow will be a long day." The screen switched off as soon as the woman was done talking, and the screen was pulled back by its tubes and returned to its original position. "There's been a mistake," Charlotte shouted to no one in particular. She was sobbing now as she still couldn't move her limbs all that well. "I'm not supposed to be here." When the screen had returned to its original position, the lights in the nursery began to dim. Soon the room was almost pitch black apart from a little nightlight next to the large crib. On the ceiling were little pictures of stars and moons. Charlotte sobbed in the dark as she slowly felt her motor functions returning. Soon she was able to stand up in the crib and lean against the bars. The room was very still and very quiet. The only sounds that Charlotte could hear was her own crinkling. Charlotte rubbed her tear-filled eyes and shouted for help. She yelled into the darkness and hoped that somebody would be able to hear and come to help her. She wasn't supposed to be here, she hadn't volunteered for anything, and none of the people in the cage upstairs had volunteered for anything. This was false imprisonment. "I'm a journalist. Help!" Charlotte shouted. She could feel herself shaking with fear as she pulled on the bars in an attempt to force her way out. Charlotte tried to use the bars to climb over the restrictive toddler bed but found that the metal bars were far too slippery to climb. "Let me out!" Charlotte shouted into the darkness.